Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming along today. My name's Kate and I'm the Programme Manager for the Data Programme at the Local Government Association. As part of our programme of data support for the sector, I'm really pleased to welcome Evie Coe, who is the Digital Accessibility Officer from Norfolk County Council, and she's going to talk to us today about accessibility in Power BI. More specifically, she's going to share insights and tips from the work that Norfolk have been doing to review and improve the accessibility of their Power BI reports and dashboards. So whenever we've run webinars on Power BI in the past, there's always been a lot of discussion in the chat about accessibility and how to deal with all the challenges around that. So I think this is going to be a really useful session. Just before we get started, I'll just mention a few bits of housekeeping. So live captions have been enabled, so please do use those if it helps you. We're also recording the session, and a copy of the recording along with subtitles and a transcript will be available in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll circulate that along with the slides. We'll have a Q&A session after the presentation. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Teams Q&A function that we've enabled rather than using the chat. And that way, if you see a question that you like, then you can vote for it, and that will help me to choose the questions that are most of interest if we don't have time to get through them all. And we do also have a couple of Evie's colleagues in the audience who might be able to answer some of the questions in writing during the session. And then finally, as I mentioned, this webinar is being run as part of the LGA's data programme, which provides support free of charge to all local authorities. We offer, amongst other things, a local government data maturity self-assessment tool, the opportunity to join panels and action learning sets, and training for councillors and officers. We're going to paste a link to the programme website in the chat, so do take a look at what's available. But that's it from me, and I'll hand over to Evie for the main presentation. Over to you, Evie.
Thank you, Kate. Right, I'll just get my slide sharing and we can get started. So just to add my my own little bit of housekeeping before I get going, I'm sharing my slides through Teams today through PowerPoint Live. So if you see any links on the slides, you should be able to click on them. But we will, hopefully my colleagues will be putting some of those links in the chat as well, so you can access them however you like. And of course, as Kate has mentioned, the slides will be shared at the end. So if you're desperate for some links, you will get them in that way as well. I'm now sharing my slides. So hopefully you can see a nice big slide that says Power BI accessibility on it. And that is what I'm going to be talking to you today. Oh, great to get some feedback. So just to start by introducing myself, my name is Evie Coe. I'm Digital Accessibility Officer at Norfolk County Council. In case you're not familiar with us, Norfolk County Council is the main local authority of Norfolk. There's a lovely map there which shows us in the north of East Anglia. Now, I do also have some colleagues in the audience today as well with me, as Suzanne Faulkner, Carmen Fisher and Anna-Louise Ollett, who are all analysts in our Insights and Analytics department. And finally, just to know, I will be saying NCC quite a lot in this presentation. I mean Norfolk County Council when I say that. I know there's lots of other councils who use the same acronym, but just to be super clear. Just a note on questions. So as Kate has said, my colleagues will be trying to answer any questions in the Q&A, but I will also try and answer some of those verbally as well. We are quite the collaborative group, which is partly what has made this project so brilliant. So you might notice that my colleagues will be answering specific questions relating to technical aspects of Power BI, whereas I'm the one to answer on more sort of digital accessibility related questions. So I think between us, we should be able to answer any questions that you have. So moving on to why we're here then. So I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about an ongoing project we're currently running to review and improve the accessibility of NCC Power BI content. So I'll walk you through a couple of different aspects. Firstly, why we're doing this work. Secondly, how we've approached it, so our methodology. Then what we've produced. I've got an overview here. I've also got some pre-recorded video demos to show you to help try and bring a few things alive a little bit for you. And then I'll end with an invitation to collaborate with us to support this work. So firstly, why this project? As I'm sure most people are familiar with, it's always a case of deciding which projects are the highest priority and which ones we take forward. So why did we decide to look into Power BI and accessibility? And this all really relates to a couple of key priorities that we as an organisation have. Firstly, digital accessibility. So our digital content should be inclusive and accessible for as many people as possible, including disabled people. This is a legal requirement for UK public sector bodies, but it's also the right thing to do, and it's in line with our inclusive core value. So promoting and improving digital accessibility is really important to us as an organisation. One of our other priorities relates to data insights. So Power BI is our data presentation and visualization tool of choice. It supports us to make data-driven and evidence-based decisions, which, as I'm sure everyone in the audience can appreciate, is hugely important. We found that its interface is relatively intuitive and allows users to create and share interactive dashboards and reports relatively easily. Helping to make complex real-time data easier to access and interpret. So it's all about being as responsive and agile as we can. So digital accessibility and data insights, two of our key priorities. Now we realised that we had a bit of a knowledge gap. Firstly, how accessible are our Power BI dashboards and reports? We're really not sure. We haven't looked into it in great detail. And secondly, what do our Power BI report creators need to do to optimize accessibility? It's one thing knowing that your dashboard might have accessibility problems, but what do you do to improve this? So the initial aim of this project was to answer those two questions. So what did we do then? So we're going to go into a bit more detail as to what the project actually entailed. Our general approach to this work was to develop, publish and test a Power BI report to determine two key things. Firstly, how to apply accessible design to Power BI reports. What do you actually need to do on a practical level to make your Power BI report accessible or more accessible? And secondly, to what extent is it possible to create a Power BI report that meets our priorities? So those two priorities I just mentioned, firstly, accessibility, and specifically conforming to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.2 at AA standard. And secondly, does it support our organisation priority and need to effectively convey data in a meaningful way? So just to pop back to that accessibility requirement for a minute, you might have noticed that when I was talking about our organisational priorities, I didn't specifically mention the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I said that just generally speaking, we want to make our digital assets more accessible. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which often people refer to as WCAG or WCAG, they are a specific sort of set of technical standards that we are legally required to meet at AA standard as a UK public sector organisation. So we picked these standards as a way to measure the accessibility of our Power BI content. But that's not to say that that's where our goals end. There's lots of additional things you can do to enhance accessibility beyond conforming to WCAG. So we picked these standards as something that we could be very specific about and measure against. But the general scope of the project has always been to go beyond those standards where possible. Okay, so how did we approach this piece of work in more detail then? Roughly speaking, the project had 4 key stages: research, development, publication, and testing. Although we did conduct testing throughout all of those stages as well as at the end. So a little bit of flexibility there. So firstly, research. We started this piece of work by conducting extensive research. We reviewed online sources, and we also tested our own Power BI reports. So I've got a few logos on the slide there, which show some of the key online sources we used: Microsoft Learn, the Government Analysis Function website, the Office for National Statistics, and Iteration Insights. We found lots of really useful information in those online areas in particular. But we also found that to gain more knowledge, especially in kind of a wide range of areas, we also needed to accessibility test our own Power BI reports to determine accessibility. Secondly, we started some development work. We used our research findings to develop guidance on how to create accessible Power BI reports. So essentially translating that research into some really kind of key practical tips for people creating Power BI reports and dashboards to help them make sure that it's accessible. A colleague outside the project then built a report following this guidance that we put together. So it was really important to us that it was a colleague outside the project, because we thought we kind of want to simulate, anybody in our organisation who works with Power BI trying out this guidance, not somebody who maybe has a particular understanding of accessibility more so than their colleagues. So there's a little screenshot on the slides here, just to give you a kind of taster of what that report had in it. So we've got some different visualizations, there's some charts, we've got text, we've got headings, things like that. The next stage was publication. So we published this guidance on how to create accessible Power BI reports internally. So we wanted to share it with other colleagues to see how they found it, give them a chance to test it out, give them the opportunity to give us feedback, ask questions, that kind of thing. We also published the report that our colleague had created to web. So that report that our colleague had created following our guidance, we then published it to web. Now, if you're familiar with Power BI, you'll know that there's several different ways to publish a report or a dashboard. We unfortunately didn't have the scope to test absolutely every different way of publishing content. So we chose to publish the report to web and test this version, because this publication method is typically how we share Power BI reports with external audiences via our website, so we will link off to them. So we thought this is probably the format that members of the public are going to see our dashboards, and also internal colleagues and partners. They are likely to view it as like this as well. Now, the final stage was testing. So that report that was published, we accessibility tested it, and we used our findings to refine our guidance on how to create accessible Power BI reports and enhance the accessibility of the report itself. So there were 2 real benefits there. In a way, we were checking that report and going, okay, has our colleague implemented all the guidance correctly? But also, are there issues with this report that actually the guidance doesn't help you address or improve or even make you aware of? So how can we refine our guidance even further to make it more comprehensive? After doing this, to verify our work, we engaged a user experience consultancy called Web Usability, and we asked them to audit the report against WCAG version 2.2 at AAA level. Now, the reason we decided to do this was because if it wasn't an external consultant accessibility testing this report, it would be me. And I have been involved in this project quite closely. And we felt that it's important to avoid marking your own homework, as it were. We really wanted to check that our idea of how accessible the report was consistent with an external consultant whose bread and butter is accessibility testing, get an idea if those things matched up. And spoiler alert, thankfully it did. So that was good. But that was a real key kind of final stage for us there. We really wanted that external view. So this is really the meaty part of the session now. So what did we find, and what did we produce based on this work that we've done? So we had 4 key findings based on the work we've done so far. Firstly, we found that we were able to create an effective report that had relatively good accessibility and it delivered significant access improvements, which we were really thrilled about. Needless to say, it's really important that our preferred tools do also support accessibility, and so we were thrilled that it was possible to create an accessible report using Power BI. However, this did require dedicated time and effort throughout the report development. So it was really quite essential that from the beginning, from the creation of the report, our colleague was reviewing our guidance, thinking about accessibility. So while it's something that's achievable, it is something that takes sort of dedicated time and effort. Our third finding was around online advice. So Microsoft's online advice on Power BI accessibility, around how to create an accessible Power BI report, and the other online sources we reviewed, absolutely did help report creators make some accessibility improvements. But we found they weren't comprehensive enough to support WCAG compliance. Therefore, conducting our own research and developing our own guidance was key. So we couldn't have created a report that had the levels of accessibility it did without actually creating our own guidance and our colleague following that guidance. And finally, we found that there were 5 accessibility issues in the report that the author was unable to address, and these were due to product limitations. So essentially, particular things around how the Power BI product works, which means that we just simply weren't able to get around or resolve those accessibility issues. So what did we produce based on those findings then? And there were 2 key outputs for this piece of work. Firstly, we created some online guidance, as I've already talked about. But we made sure that we put this where it would be available for both our colleagues and our external partners. So we have our guide on how to create accessible Power BI reports available on our public Norfolk County Council website. Secondly, we created a report for Microsoft highlighting the product limitations we found that prevented us from achieving WCAG compliance and asking Microsoft to consider addressing those. So those were our sort of 2 main outputs, straggling slightly different areas. So doing what we can, sharing our knowledge, both with colleagues and externally, but also thinking, okay, well, what can we do working with the product owner to see if there's any improvements that they can make. So I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive now into that guidance around how to create a Power BI report or dashboard that is accessible as possible. So I'm going to go through 3 different examples of advice that we have in the guidance and just go into a few more details about them so you can really get a view on the kind of practical tips we've got. Personally, I think that when we talk about accessibility, sometimes it can feel like quite a big abstract thing. We talk about making something accessible, but we often don't end up talking specifically around, the specific practical things that we need to do. So that's what we're going to try and do here, give you a bit of an insight into some of those. So the first thing to think about is reading order. So we have a page in our accessible Power BI reporting guide that talks about visual and programmatic reading order. My colleague Anne-Louise has just put a link to the guidance in the chat, by the way, so you can access that or bookmark it for later on if you need to. So there were two main questions or two main things to think about when it comes to reading order when you're creating your Power BI report or when you're reviewing one that's already been created, to think about how accessible it is. So firstly, does the visual presentation of your dashboard prompt sighted users to read it in a logical order? So essentially, when you look at your dashboard, is it obvious what order to read it in? Now, many of us do this unconsciously. For example, on my slide right here, I've got the title at the top left, and then you sort of read left to right and top to bottom. So a lot of us do this kind of automatically, but it's a really important thing just to stop and think about, have I done this in an intuitive way? And secondly, which can be a little bit more difficult, is a logical reading order also set up for keyboard navigation and screen reader users? So if you're not familiar with why you might need to use keyboard navigation, often people choose to navigate using a keyboard if they can't use a mouse due to a physical disability. There's plenty of people out there who just prefer to use a keyboard to navigate as well, and they could use a mouse, but they prefer not to. An example of when you might use a screen reader is if you are dyslexic or you're blind or you have low vision. So a screen reader will read out the contents of a web page or a document for you rather than you needing to look at it and read through it. Although sometimes, for example, if you're dyslexic, some people might prefer to listen and read at the same time. But the point is, if you're using a screen reader, it basically converts what you can see on your screen into audio. So what I've got next for you is a little pre-recorded video demo from one of my colleagues. And she's just going to run you through a few more details around reading order checks. So I'm going to start playing this now. Hopefully the audio should come through. It does take a little bit of a while to start. The video also does have captions if you have trouble hearing the audio for any reason. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of practical things that you can do to make sure that you have an accessible reading order in your report for a wide range of people using a wide range of tools. I will just pause just to see if we've got any questions that really directly relate to that demo. I do see that we've got one or two, but I will let my colleagues reply to those ones. Okay, so I've got a second topic for us to look at now that is included in the guidance. And this is around the tooltips that appear on some data visualizations. So if you're not familiar with what a tooltip is, that will be shown, an example will be shown to you in the demo video, but it's essentially a bit of content that appears when you hover your mouse over another piece of content. So there's a couple of really key considerations to factor in when you're thinking about tooltips and how accessible they are for people. So firstly, can keyboard navigation users access the information in any visualization tooltips? And secondly, can screen reader users access the information in any visualization tooltips? So we're going to look at keyboard navigation first. What are the challenges that people using keyboard navigation might face when accessing information in tooltips, and what can we do to improve that? Okay, so that should give you a little bit of an idea around keyboard navigation. Now, I've got one other demo video on this topic for you. This focuses on the experience of screen reader users relating to tooltips. Okay, so hopefully that demo gives you an idea that how you configure your tooltips really matters for screen reader users. If you configure your tooltip in one way, the screen reader will read out the content. If you configure it in another way, then it won't. Our final deep dive topic for our guidance is around contrast themes. So you might see from the screenshot on this slide that one page in our guidance is around using accessibility tools and shortcuts. So we're really mindful that there are some people who have particular tools they like to use to help them access digital content. And it's important that we try to make sure that our reports and dashboards are compatible with those tools. People can use those tools they like to use and they're happy to use easily with the report or the dashboard. So one consideration is, can users apply their own accessibility tools, like a contrast theme, and still understand your dashboard? If you're not familiar with what a contrast theme is, it includes things like dark mode and high contrast mode. So this final video here gives you an idea of how you can make your dashboard or your report accessible to people using high contrast mode. Okay, so hopefully that's given you an idea of some practical things that you can do to make sure your dashboard is compatible and understandable for people using high contrast mode. So those are just a few snapshots of what we have in our guide. Our guide is available to all on the Norfolk County Council website. You can use the link on the slide here, or if you have a look in the chat, there's a link there as well. You can also search Power BI on the Norfolk County Council website, and our guide will come up as the first result. Now, this is something that we have put together, but we are certainly not positioning ourselves as the experts in this field. If you have feedback on our guide, we would love to hear from you. You can email me at evangeline.co@norfolk.gov.uk if you have some feedback. We also have an online feedback form on our web pages, although if you'd like a reply, then please do email me instead. Don't feel like you need to remember all of this. This is also on the last slide as well, so I will come back to this. Okay, I'm going to change tack slightly now and look at those product limitations that I mentioned earlier. So you might remember that I said that we put a report together for Microsoft, which highlighted 5 product limitations we found that prevented us from achieving WCAG compliance. Now, if Microsoft deploy in product improvements to address these issues, it will make Power BI dashboards easier for many people to use, and it will also make it easier for us to create accessible dashboards. So there's some 2 key angles there that both show what benefits could be realized if these issues are addressed. Now, I'm not going to go through all 5, but I've got 2 here that I want to talk to you a little bit more about, 2 examples that I've picked out of those issues. So one issue we found was to do with an inaccessible heading structure. So the issue is that while it is possible to add visible headings to a report or a dashboard, there is no way to apply a proper heading hierarchy programmatically. There are some things you can do, but it's not fully comprehensive enough. The impact of this is that it creates a significant barrier for screen reader users, preventing them from reliably identifying and navigating using headings. And this fails the WCAG 131 criterion, which is info and relationships, and that's a level A standard requirement. So I've got another demo video here to show you a bit more about that issue. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the barriers that are currently being faced by some people around headings. Now, the other example I want to show you is around unresponsive layout. So the issue is that when using smaller screens and or zooming in, the content in a report or dashboard doesn't adapt to a single column layout. And this creates a significant barrier for some users with low vision who need to zoom, and most people using mobile. You can lose your place and must expend more physical and cognitive effort scrolling the content both vertically and horizontally. And this fails WCAG 1410 reflow, which is a level AA criterion. Now, just before I get this video demo going, I just want to remind you that we are talking about reports published to web and being shared via a link and viewed in a browser. There are, of course, other ways that you can share Power BI reports where you can view them in an app, but we're thinking about the publish to web option here. Okay, so as you can see there, these issues affect a really wide range of people. Absolutely, if you have particular disabilities or impairments, you will be affected the most, but also simply using a mobile and trying to access these reports can be difficult. So all 5 of these issues that we found, we have submitted details of them and suggestions on how to address them as Power BI product development ideas on Microsoft's Fabric community site. I've got 5 links there which you should be able to click on. They're also on my last slide, so don't worry if you miss the opportunity to do this. I will come back to that in a second. So what are our next steps then regarding this project? Firstly, regarding our online guidance, we're going to continue promoting our accessible Power BI reporting guide. We're really keen to get feedback. We're really keen for users to try it and let us know how they got on. We also need to develop support and governance structures around the guide. How do we keep it current and ensure Power BI report creators follow it? Okay, that's an ongoing challenge for us. We haven't completed this yet. So this is something that we're now thinking about. With regards to product improvements, we've shared the report with Microsoft and we hope to get a response from them soon indicating they aim to improve the aspects we've highlighted. And we're also looking to gain support from other organisations for the Power BI product development ideas we have posted on Microsoft's Fabric community site. And this is when you all come in. So this is my final slide here. I appreciate I've taken quite a lot of time, but my colleagues have done a brilliant job at replying to a lot of questions in the chats already. So hopefully some of you have had your answers already. But this is kind of where I want to end this main section of the webinar with some invitations to collaborate with us and support this work. So firstly, do you have experience with accessibility in Power BI? Or do you have feedback on our accessible Power BI reporting guide? We would love to hear from you. Please do drop me an email. My email address is evangeline.co@norfolk.gov.uk, or you can add me on LinkedIn. Secondly, would you like to see Microsoft make accessibility improvements to Power BI? You can support this work for voting for our ideas on the Fabric community site. All you need to do is click the 5 links that are on this slide. It will take you to that post on the website. You might be prompted to register or sign in, but I promise this is really quick and easy. I had to do it myself and it didn't take very long. And then you can click a vote button next to each of those posts. And that will show our colleagues at Microsoft that there are lots of us who really prioritize accessibility. We really find Power BI an incredibly useful tool and we want to keep using it, but we also want to make sure our reports and dashboards are accessible. So if that sounds good to you, please do click on these links and go and vote for those tickets. Now, we do have a little bit of time left, so I'm very happy to answer any questions if there are any that are still unanswered.
Thank you, Evie. That was just such a fantastic presentation, just so full of really practical tips and things that people can follow up on. So I'm sure that lots of people are going to be going back to that recording to watch all of those tips. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. You're right, whilst you've been doing your presentation, your colleagues have been super busy in the chat answering very many of the questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll circulate all of the questions and the written answers when we circulate the slides to make sure that all, because we're not going to have time to go through and read all of those out, but we'll circulate them. We've still got new questions coming through, so I'm just going to pick some of the more recent ones that haven't yet been answered. So one I have here from Chris is, do you have any advice regarding the use of alt text for visuals?
Yes, so that is a great question. So probably something that my colleagues are best to answer, as they're the ones who've done all this work specifically relating to Power BI. But generally speaking, with alt text as a general approach, thinking about the most important information that your visualizations are trying to get across, focusing on those, trying to stay short and sweet to the point. And if you have visuals that have multiple sections, what you can do is apply alt text to individual sections. That helps to chunk the alt text up. What we find is that if you are using a screen reader, your screen reader will read out all of that alt text relatively quickly. You can't section it up with headings and bullet points and things like that. So having short chunks of alt text are usually the most consumable way to do it.
Great, thank you. And then we have just had one in, from Reese, which I think that you, will be quite interesting to hear about. So Reese says, you mentioned that you tried to engage Microsoft to address some of the issues that we can't change on Power BI. And he's saying that they tried the same with their contacts at Microsoft, but they didn't really get much engagement in a conversation about that. How did you go about engaging with Microsoft, and have you had much of a response from them so far?
Great question. So I'm not going to lie, it's slow progress. So anybody who's eagle-eyed might have seen that the screenshot of the report was written in May, and we have yet to have a comprehensive response. We have had Microsoft colleagues who have acknowledged receipt of the report and have said that they will speak to us. What we have done is utilised our existing contacts. So we have an overall account manager, so we've reached out to them at Microsoft. Various colleagues, for example, in our data services area, have regular meetings with Microsoft contacts. So they are also raising the report and asking for a view on it there. So essentially a bit of a scattergun approach. We are trying to reach out in any way we can. And yes, we've chosen the Fabric community because we thought that is the best way to evidence a clear demand, not just from Norfolk County Council, but from other Microsoft customers for these improvements.
Thank you, Evie, and I'm sure at the LGA we can do a bit of nagging as well. So let's see if we can all kind of work together to do something. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. So Elaine says, I'm not a big fan of the MS Learn as I find it quite difficult to digest. Do you have or know of any accessible guidance for end users that cover the various tools available to them as an end user to improve their experience?
Another brilliant question. Yes, so I think Microsoft Learn can work well for some people and less well for others. What we are trying to do for our reports is include access information actually within them. And you can find out more about this approach that we're trying to take in our guidance. There's a couple of pages in the online guidance which talks about, okay, how can we make sure that people using these reports know about the accessibility tools available to them and how they can use them. We are trying to include a sort of mini statement for each report that kind of tells people about the challenges they might face when trying to access the report, but also makes them aware of key tools, you know, like those keyboard shortcuts, for example, that they can use to help them access the report more easily.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I think that's perfect timing to end it there. But once again, Evie, just thank you so much. And to all your colleagues who spent time answering questions in the chat and making those videos, which I think is going to be a really helpful resource for people. And thank you to everyone for coming. We're so pleased to have such a big attendance from everybody. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.